Story credited to Michael. It was a Thursday night, and I was driving back from Tim's place. He'd just moved to the outskirts of town, so I wasn't exactly familiar with the area. It was one of those stretches of road where everything looks the same. Long, dark, no streetlights. I wasn't in a rush, but my phone kept buzzing with work emails, and I figured I should probably pull over somewhere and answer them before they piled up. I saw this flickering neon sign out of the corner of my eye, and I swear, if I hadn't been looking for a place to stop, I probably would have missed it. Arcade, it said, though only half the letters were lit. I hadn't seen an arcade in years, so it caught me off guard. But it was late, and I needed Wi-Fi. I figured, why not? When I pulled into the lot, it was dead. There were a couple of old cars parked near the entrance, but the place looked like it hadn't seen any real business in years. The windows were dusty, the door chipped. It was like walking into a time capsule from the 90s. Inside, it wasn't much different. The lights were dim and half the machines were turned off, their screens dark. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and there was a slight hum from the overhead fluorescent lights that flickered every few seconds. There were two kids, maybe 13 or 14, playing air hockey, and they barely glanced at me when I walked in. I approached the counter, where this guy in a faded hoodie was slouched over, watching something on a tiny TV behind him. He looked up when I got close. "Hey man, you got Wi-Fi here?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. He blinked at me a few times before scratching his head. "Yeah, but you gotta play something first," he muttered, pointing to the machines like he was reciting some policy he didn't care about. I didn't argue. I'd waste a few bucks on tokens if it meant getting my emails sorted. I handed over a $5 bill, and he slid me a small plastic cup with tokens. "Machines on the left work fine," he said, nodding toward the older ones lined up against the wall. "One's in the back. Don't bother." I frowned a bit at that, but I wasn't planning on sticking around long enough to find out what he meant. I figured it was just a warning that some machines were broken, which seemed about right for a place like this. I walked over to the first machine that looked familiar, I think, and slid a token in. The screen flickered to life, and for a few minutes it was like being a kid again, zoning out and shooting aliens on an old arcade game. The buttons were sticky and the joystick had a little more resistance than it should, but it worked. About 10 minutes in, though, I started feeling weird. I wasn't sure what it was at first. It's not like I was paranoid, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that someone was watching me. The arcade was small, and the only people I'd seen were those two kids, but something felt off. I glanced over my shoulder, and sure enough, those kids had moved from the air hockey table. One of them, a kid in a blue jacket, was just standing there near the back of the arcade, staring at me. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. No expression on his face, nothing. I gave him a quick nod, trying to be friendly, but he didn't respond. Okay, that was strange, but I shrugged it off and turned back to my game. I figured kids were just weird sometimes. A couple of minutes later, I felt that same itch again. This time, though, when I turned around, the kid was gone, vanished. I looked around the room, no sign of him. His friend was still at the air hockey table, playing alone now, but he didn't seem to care that his buddy had disappeared. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I just imagined it. It was late after all. But then the lights flickered again, just for a second, but it was enough to make me freeze. That hum from the lights got louder, and there was this weird vibration in the air, like static. I glanced back at the machine I was playing. The game was still running, but it felt off. The colors were a little too sharp, the sounds a little too loud, almost distorted. I slid in another token, hoping to distract myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't scared exactly, but my instincts were screaming at me to leave. I pushed through it though, because what was I gonna do? Run out of there because a light flickered? Then I heard it, this faint sound, like a whisper coming from behind me. It was soft, almost like someone was trying to get my attention but didn't want to be heard. I spun around, half expecting to see that kid again, but nothing. Just the same dark, empty arcade. I swallowed hard and checked my phone. No Wi-Fi signal. Great. I took a deep breath and decided I'd just finish one more game and leave. As I was about to insert another token, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. One of the machines in the back, the ones I was told not to mess with, it flickered to life. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear, it wasn't turned on before. The screen lit up just for a second, then went dark again. I froze, watching it, my heart racing a little. It didn't make any sense. I thought maybe it was just a glitch. Old machines like that could do weird things. But then it happened again. This time the screen didn't just flicker, it stayed on, showing this alleyway. It was pixelated like the game, but it wasn't any game I'd ever seen. It looked real, too real. I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to get freaked out. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and I had this overwhelming urge to leave. But as I turned to head for the door, I noticed the two kids weren't there anymore. The place was completely empty. No air hockey sounds, no chatter, nothing. I walked to the front counter to ask the guy what was going on, but when I got there, he was gone too. I leaned over the counter, peering into the back room, but it was dark. Empty. Panic started creeping in. I tried the door, but it wouldn't open. I yanked on the handle harder, but it felt like it was locked from the inside. My breathing picked up, and I fumbled for my phone again, but the screen was black, no power. I could hear the hum of the machines behind me growing louder, like they were all turning on at once. I didn't dare look. I just kept yanking at the door, my heart pounding in my ears. I don't know how, but after what felt like hours, the door finally gave, and I stumbled outside, gasping for air. The night was silent, too silent. I looked back at the arcade, but the lights were off. The sign, Arcade, was completely dark. It was like the place had shut down the second I left. I didn't waste any more time. I got in my car and drove off, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see something, someone, following me. But nothing happened. I didn't stop driving until I was back in familiar territory, near the gas station at the edge of town. 2 days later, I told Tim about it, thinking he'd laugh it off or say I was imagining things. But when he asked me to show him where the arcade was, I couldn't find it. We drove up and down that road, but the building, it wasn't there. No sign, no boarded up windows, nothing. I don't know what happened that night. I don't even want to think about it too much. But one thing's for sure, I'm never going back there. Story credited to Alex. I wasn't planning to stay out late. It had been a long day at work, and all I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and crash. But you know how it goes. One thing leads to another, and before I knew it, it was already past 10. The drive home was supposed to be easy, nothing but a straight shot down the highway. But traffic had a different idea. Bumper to bumper, barely moving. I started feeling restless, like I was crawling out of my own skin, so I decided to take a detour. I don't know why I thought the back roads would be faster. They never are. But at that point, I didn't care. I just needed to get moving. That's when I saw it. This neon sign flickering at the side of the road, Playland Arcade. I hadn't seen an arcade in years. The sight of it was strange, especially this far out of town where everything else was either fast food joints or gas stations. I didn't even think arcades like that existed anymore, not around here at least. The first thing that crossed my mind was, what's an arcade doing here? But the idea of stepping inside appealed to me more than it should have. Maybe I was just looking for an excuse to break the monotony of the drive. Or maybe I wanted to chase some nostalgia. Either way, I made the turn and pulled into the empty parking lot. The place looked deserted. There were a couple of old cars parked near the entrance, the kind you'd see rusting away in someone's backyard. The windows of the arcade were dark, but the neon sign buzzed faintly, casting this sickly glow over the cracked pavement. I hesitated for a second, debating whether or not to go inside. It was late and the place seemed a little off, but I figured, what the hell? I could kill a few minutes, maybe play a game or two and get back on the road. Besides, it wasn't like I had anywhere else to be. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Musty, like old carpets mixed with dust. The lights were dim, casting long shadows over the rows of arcade machines. The place looked stuck in time. Everything from the machines to the furniture screamed 1980s. It was like stepping into a museum of my childhood, but somehow it didn't feel right. The air felt thick, heavy, and the only sound was the low hum of the machines. I walked up to the change machine and slid in a 5. It worked, which surprised me, and I pocketed the quarters. I wasn't sure which game to start with. Most of the machines looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The screens flickered slightly, and some of the buttons looked worn down to the plastic. I finally settled on an old pinball machine. It wasn't anything special, just something to pass the time. I got into the rhythm of the game, but every so often I'd feel this strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I glanced around, but there was no one else. The place was dead silent. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. That's when I heard it. A faint beep coming from one of the machines in the corner. It was an old racing game, the kind with a steering wheel and pedals. The screen was dark, but I could hear the game's startup noise, like it was powering on by itself. I hadn't touched it, and there was no one else around. I walked over, curious. Maybe it was on some kind of timer, or maybe the power was glitchy. I peered closer at the screen, but it stayed black. No lights, no visuals. Just the sound, looping over and over again. The same beep every few seconds. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. It's just an old machine, I told myself. Probably a wiring issue or something. But as I turned to walk away, the beeping stopped, and the machine whirred to life. The screen flickered, and an image appeared. It wasn't a game menu, it was a camera feed. At first I thought it was part of the game, some weird intro sequence or something, but then I realized it was showing the arcade. The camera was positioned near the ceiling, angled down, capturing the room in real time. I saw myself standing in front of the machine, staring at the screen. My heart started pounding. Is this a joke? I looked around the room, scanning for hidden cameras, but I didn't see anything. No blinking red lights, no obvious wires. The feed stayed on me, unmoving. I backed away from the machine, my skin crawling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I scanned the room again, more carefully this time. In the corner near the back, I saw something, or someone. A figure. Motionless, standing in the shadows. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, or maybe just a trick of the light. But as my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I realized it wasn't a mannequin. It was a person. A man, standing completely still, his face half hidden in the shadows. I froze. My mind raced. How long has he been standing there? Why didn't I see him when I came in? The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching me. I took a step back, my pulse quickening. My mind was screaming at me to leave, to get out of there, but my legs felt heavy, like they were stuck to the floor. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. "Hey man, you good?" No response. He just kept staring. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The only sound was the low hum of the machines, but it felt louder, like it was growing, filling the room. I took another step back, and that's when the lights flickered. For a brief second, everything went black. When the lights came back on, the man was gone. I didn't wait to find out where he went. I turned on my heel and bolted for the door. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the handle, nearly dropping my keys as I rushed to unlock the car. I got in, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of the parking lot without looking back. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway home. Even then, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that man standing in the road behind me. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if it was real or just my mind playing tricks on me. But one thing's for sure, I'm never taking that detour again, and I'll never set foot in an arcade after dark. Story credited to Adam. I wasn't supposed to be out late that night. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment decisions, you know? The kind that nags at you, even when everything seems fine. I was just coming back from a friend's place. We'd grabbed dinner at some generic fast food spot, nothing special, just catching up. It had been a long day at work, and I honestly just wanted to head home. But then I saw it. An old, worn-down building glowing in the distance, Joe's Arcade. I couldn't believe it was still there. My mind immediately flashed back to the summers when I was a kid. My friends and I used to spend hours there, dumping quarters into machines, losing track of time. It was strange, though. I hadn't seen or thought about that place in years, and I'd driven this road 100 times since then. Yet here it was, almost like it had appeared out of nowhere. It was late, close to midnight. I hesitated, but something about it drew me in. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe I was just trying to avoid going home. Either way, I pulled into the parking lot, which was barely lit by a couple of flickering streetlights. The asphalt was cracked and weeds poked through the gaps. There were no other cars, just mine, sitting there in the quiet night. I stepped out and took a deep breath, the air still and cold. The faint hum of the arcade's neon sign buzzed in the background, and that's when I noticed something odd. There was no noise, no cars passing by, no rustling trees, nothing, just silence. I walked up to the door and pushed it open. The inside was dimly lit, just like I remembered. Dusty, old, with a faint smell of moldy carpet. Rows of arcade machines lined the walls, some still glowing faintly, others completely dead. The place looked abandoned. There wasn't anyone behind the counter, no kids playing games. Hell, there wasn't even any music playing, just the low hum of the few machines still turned on. I walked further in, looking around. The machines were old, but they were the classics. Pac-Man, Galaga, Street Fighter. I reached into my pocket, felt a couple of quarters rattling around, and decided, why not? I wandered over to one of the machines, Space Invaders, and slid a quarter into the slot. The screen flickered and the game started up, but it was slow, almost like the machine was struggling to keep up. As I played, I kept glancing around, that weird feeling of being watched creeping up on me. It was unsettling. You ever get that feeling when you're alone, but it doesn't really feel like you are? I brushed it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. The arcade was empty. It was late. I hadn't been here in years, and I was tired. That was all. But the longer I stayed, the more the unease settled in. There was something wrong with this place. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. After a while, I moved to a different game, Cruisin' USA, a racing game I remembered playing when I was younger. I sat down in the seat, slid in another quarter, and hit the gas. But something was off. The track on the screen, it looked familiar, too familiar. I stared at it, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. It was the same road I had just driven on. The exact same. Every curve, every tree, even the billboards. It was all there, like someone had copied it straight from real life. I paused for a second, my pulse picking up. How was this possible? Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe I'd driven on roads like this 100 times and it just seemed familiar. But no, this was too specific. I kept playing, my heart racing as I sped down the road in the game. Then I heard it, the low rumble of an engine behind me. I glanced in the rearview mirror on the screen, and there it was. A car, its headlights blinding, getting closer and closer. I pressed the pedal harder, trying to pull ahead, but it was no use. The car behind me was gaining fast, its headlights burning into the screen. Suddenly, the car rammed into me, the impact jolting the entire seat. I swerved, barely holding on as my car careened off the side of the road. The screen flickered, the words "Game Over" flashing in front of me in bright red letters. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking. I wiped them on my jeans, trying to calm myself down. It was just a game, right? But it didn't feel like just a game. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the arcade was still empty. That's when I heard it again. The sound of an engine, this time from outside. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly turned my head toward the door, and through the grimy window I saw them. Headlights. A car, idling in the parking lot, its engine rumbling low. I froze, my mind racing. There hadn't been anyone else in the parking lot when I arrived. I was sure of it. But now, there was this car, sitting there, waiting. The lights were on, but I couldn't see anyone inside. I couldn't see the driver. I stood up, my legs shaky, and made my way to the door, my eyes locked on the car. As soon as I stepped outside, the engine cut off. The headlights flickered and died. The night was silent again, and the car just sat there, empty. I stood there staring at it, my breath catching in my throat. There was no way this was a coincidence. I felt the keys in my pocket and fumbled to pull them out, my hands trembling. I needed to get out of there, now. I sprinted to my car, not looking back. As soon as I got in, I locked the doors and started the engine. I didn't wait for anything. I peeled out of the lot, tires screeching on the cracked pavement. The road was dark, the headlights from my car barely cutting through the night. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, expecting to see those same headlights from the game, from the parking lot, chasing me down. But they never came. I didn't stop driving until I was home, safe inside with the doors locked. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling. That car, those headlights, the arcade, it all felt too real.